Therapist Thrival Guide, where we cover all of the things that graduate school didn't teach you. Welcome to the Therapist Thrival Guide. My name is Miranda Barker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Lucas Volini.
I'm a political pundit.
Interesting. He's also a licensed marriage family therapist.
Yes.
And has been doing it for at least 10 years.
Yeah.
And with us today is the incredible Kathryn Jargo. Kathryn, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your trumpet playing days. I'm just kidding.
Oh, man.
Coming up from Winona, Minnesota.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
How long have you been a therapist?
Not that long. I have to do math. Un momento. 5 years? 6 years?
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
What is your...
I was a social worker for about a decade before that.
A license, just at the bachelor's level or?
Master's level, but not a social work master's, so you don't get to call yourself the same thing. But I worked for government, so I could call myself a social worker.
Yeah.
I worked with folks coming out, civil commitments, and then later on, folks coming out of jail and prison.
Oh, wow. I didn't know this about you.
I know. Well, I was listening to you the other day on episode 1 or 2 or something. I was like, Miranda and I need to talk more.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We're both coming from government jobs.
Union.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the Ellie life now.
I did my stint in government.
Yeah.
What did you do in government?
Worked for Carver County for 3 years.
Oh,
Ran
that's
an adolescent day treatment program.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got in a lot of trouble.
For what?
Everything.
That's fair.
Are you going to elaborate?
Well, it's just county, like I called it the Anika program. It was based on Buddhist philosophy. People didn't like that, but it worked.
I bet it did.
Yeah. It's like it's hard to be a disruptor in a county system.
Absolutely.
You immediately make a lot of enemies.
Hard to be creative in that system.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you're listening and you are working for the government, trying to be creative, we believe in you. It's a hard job. We believe you can do it. You are needed. So are you a licensed clinical social worker? What's your educational
I am a
background?
Licensed professional clinical counselor.
Okay, LPCC with some social work flavor.
Yeah. I went to University of Denver. Whoop, whoop. Nope, Denver University. No, it's University of Denver, but it's DU. It's very confusing. In forensic psychology, and that as close as one could translated to the LPCC track from Minnesota.
Okay, that's so interesting.
Yeah. I applied to their PhD program in forensic psychology.
Can we
long time ago.
Can we just take a break and you
Yeah.
guys can tell us a little bit, just a moment about what forensic psychology is and what you were hoping to do with this?
Yes, mine is corny and so I totally was like in love with Silence of the Lambs growing up. It's like, yeah,
Good movie.
The behavioral analysis stuff, it's a good movie, and the books of those are based on all that FBI shenanigans. Delightful, not exactly real. So then the clinical programs for forensic psychology, as best as you can say, is really just psych and law. So some sort of touch point with law. So sometimes folks will specialize in supporting victims of crime. Some folks will support sort of the criminal justice world. Many would argue they're all intertwined. So there's different ways to be a part of it. But
That's awesome.
psych and law. Mm-hmm.
So then, were you planning on doing that out of your bachelor's were you planning on doing that?
Forensic psychology?
Yeah.
I don't quite know what I was thinking.
Huh.
I was like 22.
Yeah.
I think I was like, it's just like the books, right? And then you move on with life. Then you have your first internship and you're like, absolutely not.
Oh,
But
really?
That's okay. Yeah. Worked in juvenile probation for my internship, my first one. And then I was in a county correctional facility, jail, and community corrections. Colorado has a pretty cool community corrections system where folks aren't necessarily in a jail, but they are technically incarcerated. So it's more opportunity to be part of the community and then build a life. Weird.
And so how did you end up in Minnesota?
I'm generally from here.
Okay.
So I went to Denver for school and then came back.
Nice. Got it. And so tell me about your role here now.
So I am a clinical programs director. So I support our humans and our teams in greater Minnesota outside the metro. So
awesome.
Community and clinic based.
Do you still see clients?
I do.
That's awesome.
I do see a handful every week.
That's great.
Poor guys.
So do you supervise clinic directors or supervise therapists?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit convoluted, partly because I value having touch points with different programs. So I still support 2 community providers, and then there's 6 clinic directors. 6, 7.
Nice.
Let's say 7.
They won't know
I'll do
which
math
one
later.
of you forgot.
You don't know who I forgot.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yes.
So today we want to talk about compassionate accountability. And when we were talking about this episode, a lot of people said I should talk to Kathryn Jargo.
Oh, my.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Everyone likes you. You're like super likable.
And I have an affectionate nickname, which I don't think this is exactly where this is going, but for the first year or 2 here, I was a red pen lady.
Ooh, okay.
I am happy to let you know where your grammar went awry on your documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares about that, but it's important.
They care if your message is unclear.
Yeah.
Because we're reading documentation to get your message, especially when you're supervising humans and I can't tell what just happened. We have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's usually where that came in.
Well, yeah, I can appreciate that because it is an aspect of clinical documentation that doesn't get a lot of appreciation or focus. You know, it's like maybe we assume that people understand grammatics, you know, and how to properly structure a sentence. But yeah, I've certainly reviewed clinical documentation that was very difficult to comprehend, which is problematic.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me more about this topic from your perspective, Lucas. When we say compassionate accountability, what does that mean?
I think I think compassionate accountability is a method we'll be talking about, but it's a method to address, and one of the elements of this profession that we don't, we're not excited about. We don't necessarily get into this work, to be met with this, but it's like one of the realities that hits emerging therapists pretty quickly are demands on meeting your quota, making sure you're hitting your deadlines with clinical documentation. And when you're struggling to do that, it's like the one end of it is, as the supervisor, how do you approach the supervisee, or clinician with a conversation around where they're struggling to kind of hit their job requirements. But also, I think it would be beneficial to dig into how to receive that, in a way where it's, constructive, depersonalized enough, or maybe I would say not unnecessarily personalized to any degree. But yeah, it's like they're tough conversations to have. What we know about therapists is we tend to rank pretty high in agreeableness, from the Big 5 personality research. And when you rank super high in agreeableness, it can be particularly difficult to engage in conversations that are not agreeable, such as, why are you only billing for 14 clients a week when the job expectation is 24? Why are your DAs, 2 months past due?
And also, why are they shit?
Yeah, why is your clinical documentation insufficient? Not quite meeting that standard that we've talked about in other episodes. And I would just say, kind of square one from the get-go, it sucks having those conversations, like having to sit down with an employee that's underperforming. And some of the best advice I got when I was moving into like supervisor roles was, it's like, don't wait for it to not suck. It's always going to suck, and the goal isn't to have those conversations in a way where it's like not at least somewhat uncomfortable. But you have to appreciate kind of the value and meaning around why it's important for people to perform at the standards that have been established. And even when I say that too, I think an important point to clarify is the standards that have been established aren't always just arbitrarily decided upon by your employer or the agency.
Do you mean like quotas? What do you mean by those standards?
Like state legislative, or like if you're from Minnesota, we have Rule 29, or we have 245I. So we have like things our state says for an exchange of money on insurance claims, we need these pieces or something.
Yeah.
Like
So like documentation wise, it's we adhere to a lot of state regulated statutes, and standards and expectations, but also when it comes to hitting your client quota, that's kind of an issue with insurance companies and managed care and how much we get reimbursed for each session a therapist bills for, because to run a community-based agency of, say, 15, outpatient therapists, if you want that to be sustainable, it's like you need to be generating income and revenue. Mm-hmm. And the way we generate income and revenue is through third-party reimbursement primarily. And so when providers aren't hitting that quota, it's putting the agency in the red, for especially if they're salaried or whatever kind of that payment structure is. And so those are always the things, that kind of at the higher up levels of leadership, a lot of the conversations we have are like, yeah, where's the revenue at? How much are we paying our clinicians compared to how much they're bringing in? And that's all geared toward a pretty razor thin margin of financial sustainability to keep the organization running.
So when we think about who this episode is for today, it's for supervisors who have to have tough conversations with their supervisees, with their therapists. It's for therapists who have to maybe listen to some of those hard conversations and participate in those, take that feedback. Do you think that some of this, the wisdom or what we talk about today, can also apply to therapists that have to hold their clients accountable for certain things too?
Oh yeah, like paying their bills.
Yeah.
That sucks.
That is one of the hardest conversations I've had with a client, where you say, hey, this is the amount due, and navigating those financial conversations, or even just holding them accountable in other parts of their lives.
Yeah, like late no-shows.
Yeah. Oh, I hate having that conversation.
Yeah, frequent late cancels.
Yes.
So compassion and accountability is essentially, it's like, how do we address an individual's shortcomings, and being accountable to a commitment that they've agreed to in a way that's constructive, in a way that is not dehumanizing. That does come through a filter of compassion, because I think, and we see this play out all the time in various scenarios when somebody's maybe disappointing you or you feel like they're falling short. You can kind of start making sense of that dynamic by just being like, all right, well, this person's not doing what they said they would do. I need to tell them to do it, or else, but the other aspect to it is what's getting in the way of them living up to this standard? Why are they struggling? What's going on with them?
So I had the pleasure of sitting in on a CEU that was trauma-informed care over telehealth. And it was 2 hours, so it was really like just touch points. But it was delightful. Let me say that. They were using these ideas of the no-shows, the late cancels, the not taking care of the bill in the portal, or some of these other, like, what have become sort of standards in our field as examples of what you were just saying about, okay, what is getting in the way? This feels unusual. Or is it, now, in this particular training, many of the examples they came up with, they drew a line to some sort of trauma piece in their past, or some sort of, like, behavioral pattern that was deeper than, like, a late cancel, right? And I think that is part of that compassionate thing, the context, the how it informs our approach, our frequency of the conversation, what kinds of supports we put in place for that human for whatever reason. And we're therapists, so our brains work that way, hopefully. Not everyone should be in the field. Whoop. So there's those pieces too, but it was a delightful conversation.
No, that's so important. I mean, and I think you can apply that to all of the kind of points that we're hoping to drive home today, because so much of compassion is looking at the context.
Yeah. And that's kind of up to the person in a position to check in on why things aren't going as they should be going, and so how you start that conversation, is going to be informed by how you're making sense of it and conceptualizing it yourself, and I think, an example for me that I thought of, just this moment was, like I went through a phase where I was having a really hard time with email, like a really hard time. Like I had a super strong aversion to email. And, there was no shortage of, instances of maybe 7, 8, 9 people along the way being like, you never check your email. That's a problem. Start checking your email. Until somebody was like, hey, why do you think you're having such a hard time with email? Just like the first person someone asked me that, like it was emotional, I felt cared for, and like I felt like there was space where I could really think about that because I hadn't really thought about it, until someone created a space where I could, because I sensed that they were sincerely curious and concerned. They were like, that's weird. Like email seems like an easy thing to do. It's like you've been having a hard time with it. Like, are you okay? What's going on? What do you think it might be about? And then we spent a lot of time breaking it down and digging into it. I had way more clarity around it. And I would say that was a pretty big turning point in finally getting things on a different track. And that was delivered through compassion, but it was also very clearly a conversation organized around accountability. Like it was never, it's okay that you don't check your email because of this reason. It was like, it's still not okay you're not checking your email. Like that is in fact a problem that needs to be addressed. But yeah, with compassion, I was able to actually get to the crux of what it was about. And I mean, for me, at least what it came down to was a phase in my life that preceded kind of the email struggles, where I had anticipated a pretty important email, and a number of those emails were like really disappointing.
Yeah.
And it's like so much to the point where I didn't want to look. So it's not like I was looking at my emails and not responding. It's like I couldn't even look at email for a while. And so it's to bring more of a mindset, where we are contextualizing whatever it is that's going on, and we're approaching these conversations, with a solution-focused lens, where we're not, making accommodations that we shouldn't be making because we're worried about holding another person accountable. But, accountability never needs to be something that's removed from compassion. And I think especially in, like the corporatization of the world that we're living in, and because people who run companies have such razor thin margins, to stay sustainable, we can forget about the compassionate piece. And it's not helpful when we forget about it.
Gosh, and what a good question for them to ask. It gets to the heart, and it shows that they care, but also is, I mean, you know why they asked that question. And I think that's just really powerful.
Yeah, and it almost just them like asking that question in that way changed it from something I just felt totally buried under to something that could have a solution. Like something that there's a way out of.
Well, you almost got control over it once you got to the root issue, right? Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. I was present when Lucas went without checking his email for a little while, and I just knew that I needed to find him in person if I needed to
I was here all the time. It's like I'm here every day.
No, but you do an awesome job checking your email now. It's great.
Yeah, well, I do an adequate job.
You do above average.
No one is coming back to you and being like, Lucas, we got to talk about the email situation.
It's true.
It's been a while.
It has.
Yeah.
No, it's good. What a good example.
Yeah. What are some instances, Kathryn, you've probably had a lot of experiences of having to hold people accountable, reporting to you. Are there methods that you found to be more effective than others?
Sure. I think sort of to how you're talking about individual responses too. I think that can be a little bit messy in the beginning, no matter what the relationship is, whether it's staff and client, peer-to-peer, supervisor, supervisee, whatever the case is. You got to kind of like feel it out. I had someone tell me that, what you're talking about should never be a surprise. So there is something to be said about, okay, do we have like the base really clear to humans? I think there's some frustration over, like, you sign the document, it says the thing, help me understand what what's missed. And you're still going to be having these conversations. So methods are just like often having these conversations often, even if it's not necessarily accountability conversation about like, this is what needs to change, but it can also be like, keep this up, name the thing that should continue. And then you're still having the conversation so that if there is something that needs to change, you've already built a base of like, we can have these conversations. We can talk about documentation. Doesn't it suck when you have a month of notes to do? Someone tells you have a month of notes to do, and you're like, yeah, I know I have a month of notes to do.
That's all I think about.
Like a Captain Obvious. Thank you very much. But that doesn't mean you don't talk about it. So I think there's just ways of like, I am not a great validator, not my strength, but I am a frequent bringer-upper of the thing. So I think we all have our talents of how we can do those pieces. And actually in the big clinic director, clinic manager, and associate clinic director meeting we had a little bit ago, people were talking about, okay, so what are my strengths and what are my struggles, and who has an opposite that I can be like, hey, you need a validator, you're going to go to that human, but let me know when you need an action plan. So there's also like a delegation piece that I think can come up. I've seen leaders do that when folks are having trouble collecting balances from their clients. It's not my comfort. I don't want to do it. You get like a Bucky, what are we talking about? Angsty teenager human? Like, absolutely not. Okay, then here's the alternative. Like, so I think choice is a big option, or a big, what were you saying? Like, what are the go-to helpful tactics? Choices, I think, are always helpful. We know that about kids, right? Do you want to do the dishes, or do you want to clean the bathroom? You got to pick one. So choice, bring it up often. I used to be on a drug court team, and they talk about proximal and distal goals, right? So you don't have the same consequences if the goal is super distant for someone than if the goal is super right here. So if I have my humans that can write a awesome progress note but can't keep their billable hours up, we're going to have different consequences, even if in the grand scheme of things it's all part of your job. So I think that's an individual piece as well. I could keep talking.
But like when you said, these conversations shouldn't ever come as a surprise.
Yeah.
You know, and so whether that's with a supervisee, you know, and their expectations of their employment, you know, or a client paying their bill, it's like both of those things should be well established at the get-go of that relationship. You know, it's like when you bring on a new therapist, make sure they're familiar with what their employment contract is. When you onboard a new client, it's like every session or every intake should have an initial component of discussing fees, you know, and how they're going to pay for these services. I think what gets tricky with clients is, well, yeah, I mean, it does just suck, you know, and a lot of it is us, again, battling the realities of managed care. You know, like I've been in situations where, you know, I'll be seeing a client with a $2,000 balance, you know, and it's like they know that they have a balance past due because they get the emails, you know, they get the letters in the mail. But it's like, it's because they have shitty insurance. You know, it's like they have a $4,000 out-of-pocket deductible on top of a $500 a month premium, even to have that policy, you know, and it's like, it's incredible how many people forego mental health supports because it's financially unattainable. And I would say the demographic that gets hit with that the worst is demographic that's, you know, makes enough money to not be on state insurance. But, you know, it's like they're living paycheck to paycheck in a lot of ways. And it's like when they're in that deductible, if they have a high deductible plan, it's like my intakes for therapy are billed at $240. And they have to pay that fully out of pocket.
Yeah.
And so it does suck because a lot of times part of what they're struggling with is stress from finances.
So you can have empathy for them. What if you were having this conversation with your client, what would you do? Like, would you just say, hey, time to talk about finances. Hey, how much can you pay today? Like, how would you go about that?
I mean, I guess it's hard honestly, at this point in my career and life, if they're financially strained, I would clear their balance. but like that's not good advice for the general public.
It's unhelpful.
Very
is the word I
unhelpful.
would use.
Well, I would
Not
say
accountable.
it's not necessarily. I wouldn't do it in a way that was unhelpful. You know, like it's never just been all right, forget about it. Let's not worry about it. It's more of what could this mean? You know, and what might it free up? And then it's not necessarily just clearing up balance. It's more so like, all right, well, let's just shift to like, I'd be more inclined to not bill, you know, too, than, you know, kind of clear a balance. But earlier in my career, those things were absolutely not options, you know, and for majority of people, it is not an option. And I think what's most unfortunate about it is you have to be prepared for the client to stop coming, because sometimes that will be their only option, is to stop showing up.
Yeah.
And so in those situations, it's can you still find a way to have a therapeutic conversation around that?
Mm-hmm.
That is the piece I find very valuable with new humans to the field, is this actually gets to be therapeutic. This actually gets to be you being a safe, kind, slow-moving human that's going to have a tough conversation and have said and mutual expectations. That doesn't happen enough. And I think the other hope is that if you can have that with your client, then maybe you can go to your boss and say, actually, this is not a clear expectation. You can have those challenge points where you don't always have to just be like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm totally going to do that tomorrow. It's going to happen. Absolutely. As opposed to like, actually, that's the hardest thing for me to do, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And what are my options? And, so I love it I don't love it as a therapeutic opportunity, but it is one. And I think it goes with late cancels, no-shows, kind of the intermittent flow of showing up. Like they come 4 in a row, and then there's like 2 late cancels, and you're like, son of a biscuit. And then it's like another 4 in a row. And there's just these like, you also get to challenge and sort of adapt your own boundaries around that. Where am I comfortable? Where am I not?
Yeah. Well, and even just saying what was behind that, like what you're saying is using some of these conversations as a therapeutic tool where you're talking about what's going on in your life, what's happening.
Yeah, being able, like, we can get through a conflict. We can disagree. I can get it wrong. I think folks forget that part as an authority figure in these relationships. I can get it wrong. One of my first humans I supported in the therapeutic process, had a big bill that racked up and didn't see him again. And I get how and why. And I know enough context in that situation where I'm like, totally get that, what happened. And I'm good with it, but I work for a company, and at that time we weren't so many people fold. We were like 15 of us, and there's just different spaces around stakeholders, honestly.
Yeah.
And
so then what did you do?
It's sitting there.
So, like, would you have, in that scenario, sent, like, paper statements and been like, I'm going to send a couple of these by mail, see what happens?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some inner I'm really good. Maybe it's one of my superpowers to be like the thing, and then it's over here. Not necessarily compartmentalizing, but moving on from some of those pieces. So for me, it was easy to send the communication. I think I'm a big fan of multiple communication, so I sent official looking, like the statements, and I think I called, and I probably had that human's email or something like that. And then I moved on with my life. Yeah. I think that's maybe something people have to figure out for themselves as they go into different kinds of work environments. Like, how much control do you have over that? If you don't have a lot, know what you do have so that you aren't, shooting yourself in the foot on some of these pieces, and you aren't getting wrapped up in something that's not going to change. Like, way to put your energy in a really useless space. Right. I know it's sitting there. I know that balance is sitting there. I'm fine. It's been 4 years. Ellie seems to be okay. I don't know what happens past that, and I don't think I need to. But, if you're in, like, private practice or you're doing your own thing, that gets to be considerably more razor thin, I imagine. It's all on you. Yeah. You aren't a team keeping something afloat.
And I think when it comes to, like, compassion, accountability with clients and client balances, like, that is a situation that if you stay ahead of it, you don't have to find yourself in it.
Right.
It's like run a monthly report of owed balances of your caseload. It's like pretty much every EHR on the planet will do that with the click of a few buttons. The more clear the expectations are at the intake, the easier it is to stay on top of this. I do think it's best practice to have clients pay for their session either ahead of time at the get-go or I sometimes at the conclusion. I think it does feel better to pay at the beginning than at the end. I think running a credit card is a horrible way to end a therapy session.
I was just saying, my old therapist had the old, like, well, how they'd, like, slap
time's
their
up.
legs and they'd stand up and they'd be like, so running the same card? I'm like, running the same card. It was that cracked me up. But it was sort of like, therapy's done, let's do some brass tacks and move on with our lives. So I had but that was standard from day one. So that was an easy rhythm.
Yeah, it's therapists sent to make this more weird than the clients do. It's like clients are coming to a service that they know they're a consumer of. It's like expected that they're going to have to pay for it. When therapists get real anxious about it and bring their own anxieties into it, that's when the conversation can, one, not be constructive, but also I think that's when you lose track of where things are even at, and so if you find yourself in a position where a client has a $2,000 balance, it's like, where was the conversation when they had a $250 balance?
Yep.
Right.
It's like the sooner we can bring it up with clients in a way where it's financially manageable for them, and then you can talk about like the feasibility of continuing.
Yeah.
It's like, are you in a position where you can continue to pay for these services? If not, what might some of your other options be? So definitely stay ahead of it, but it's at the end of the day, it's like you have to take yourself seriously enough to believe that you should be getting paid for the service that you're offering.
That the time is valuable,
Yeah.
that it has an exchange rate.
Yeah, and people find it valuable.
Yeah.
Like that people, your clients are getting something out of this. This is, and in some ways it does help you feel more legitimate. I don't know. It's
legitimate.
Tricky. Yeah.
It should, so money's just weird. Just in general, we suck at talking about money.
Yeah.
I think that's the most uncomfortable question I could ask any client.
How much
money did you make last quarter?
If you're going to this field, you got to be able to talk about money and sex.
Yeah, sex is easy.
And then she used to make us say different words, and I was like, this is now getting really weird. But those are like the two. If you can't, and then one of the challenges is like go to family members and do that. I could do that with my clients way easier than family members.
Oh yeah.
But I thought that was valuable information. Like, actually, you gotta be able to bring these up.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone in grad school knew for what reason you needed to be able to talk about money. But it serves us well.
Quick tip. So I used to see a client who their health insurance was similar, where it was like, I think they had to pay like $4,000 out of pocket or something before the insurance really kicked in. And so what I would always do, and I talked with the client about this, but I would put an email reminder or like a reminder in my Outlook calendar for the 30th day of every month. I guess in February, I guess it was just the 28th or 29th, but the 30th, and I would always just run their statement and email it to them, and then they would just send me like an email confirmation back to like run their card. And so then I was just running their card, and it was just something that wasn't weird because we had that conversation early on, and we just had this like, this is how I'm going to do this. I think I got that tip from one of the clinic directors here, but just trying to, again, set expectations right away at the
beginning. Find a method that is the least uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I do the same with licensure supervisees. Like, we've got it all settled. We've had the conversation up front at the end of every session. And I don't do it in front of them. Like, I'm like, bye. And then I go do the thing. And then email the receipt. Yeah. Even though some of them are like, I don't want the receipt. I don't need to know. I'm like, yeah, you do. And then I give them the receipt.
Yeah. I mean, but actually, even with you saying that, it makes me think about how I have never once paid for licensure supervision and like thought, oh, this is such a waste of money.
Yeah.
Like every single time when I was getting supervision, I mean, sometimes it's so expensive, and I would, Venmo my supervisor or, pay through whatever. And
I use the Delight in like sliding cash across the table.
Are you serious?
Oh gosh, we would laugh
that's
so hard.
funny.
I'd be like, Karen, and like whatever the amount was. We didn't have Venmo back then, so I would just be like, whoop. It was one of the most joyful moments of my Wednesday nights for 2 years.
See, and I just feel like if we find that so valuable and we have no problem paying that, then I think that we should, turn that on ourselves and be like, we are also worth it, and clients view this about our services as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, wanting to pivot back though to hard conversations with supervisors or supervisees, and kind of because you were talking about so many good tips, you just rattled a bunch of them off, and but it was really good. And I just want to revisit though. We went off on that tangent because Lucas was saying this should never be a surprise. Mm-hmm. And then, but I wanted to go back to some of the other tips that you were talking about where, oh gosh, you were saying things like, I can't remember.
I mean, it should never be a surprise. Know your people, like your delivery and your system. Often say it up front. I don't know.
So when you are talking to, I remember what I was going to say. And it was about bringing it up often. So for clinicians that aren't meeting quotas, or maybe they're not doing well with their documentation, how often are you bringing it up to them? How do you bring it up to them? And then do you also bring it up for clinicians that are doing well? Like, do you just kind of have a system where you're like, every time I have supervision, I just bring up quotas? Or
yeah, the answer is yes. One thing that's become a lovely tool within Ellie is our like, we call them check-in notes, but really it's just like all the things you could occasionally or often bring up. So it's more like for the person starting the conversation, and actually for the supervisee as well. These aren't secret. We talk about them together. So every time, these are the topics that'll come up.
Is it like an outline?
Yeah, you've had one, right? Or you check it'll say like hours conversation or documentation conversation, diagnosis, cultural competency. Like there's all these pieces that we could bring up. It's not a huge amount, mm-hmm. but it allows your brain to go, oh, yep, even if it's just like a temperature check. So I would say, yes, I bring it up every chance I can, even if it's like rock on, mm-hmm. or like, whoa, I know you were sick last week. So I'm an out loud processor, which is helpful with these situations, right? Because I'm just rattling and they can choose what to grab a hold of. So I do often. I do tend to, on Mondays, check things out, send everyone a note. I once accidentally on purpose, called everyone on my team through Teams because I was trying to show someone how to do a group call. And I scared the shit out of every single one of them. They're like, oh God, Kathryn called. What happened? And I was like, that's a terrible response. So trying to have often communications, like frequent, even if they're like, hey, favorite meme of the day, go. Mm-hmm. So that we don't have that same visceral, like, Kathryn mm-hmm. reached out. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean I'm good at it. It's just my intention of doing that. But yes, I try to say, like, hey, this is awesome. So close. What happened? Where are we going with this? All those pieces. And it does tend to be around hours, billable hours. It tends to be around documentation. Sometimes it's even like, I would say a standard of being in this field is also like collaboration. Hey, I noticed you haven't brought anything up. You haven't brought a case to consult about, or we missed you at the last 17 meetings. That's not a thing. Maybe they quit and I didn't notice or something, right? But I don't know if this is quite to Lucas's point earlier, but like I notice, like I see you. That doesn't mean I have an answer, and you're not hiding. Maybe that's your intention, but I think that's also, if it is their intention, then you start to tip into the conversation of coaching out. We may not be the field for you, or we may not be the delivery for you. Different agencies are going to have different requirements around documentation timelines, mm-hmm. or independence in your schedule and your control over the other pieces are going to have more or less. So that's an opportunity to be like, maybe this isn't for you, and what would that look like, and how could this be different? Yeah. And if they're going to fight you on it, then I'm going to put my energy elsewhere.
So if you have a supervisee or a therapist on your team that's struggling with, X, Y, and Z, how do you support them to do better? Like, what are some ways that you have found to help therapists, see more clients or get back on track with some of these things?
Oh, gosh. The super rigid part of my brain says sometimes we make lists and okay, let's just list all the things we talked about. And you just outright strike the ones that are not going to happen. So I find that to be sort of you have some tools, and what are the ones do you need me to stop bringing up, right?
Sure.
Takes two to tango.
Sure.
Sometimes it is I remember one of the leadership summit daily bobs we had talked about different leadership styles. And one of them is, I don't remember what it was called, but it was basically you're going to do the thing. There's almost a command style where actually, you're going to stop seeing clients for the next 2 days until you get all your documentation in. And then you're going to call me at 4 o'clock and tell me how we're doing. And then we'll start the clock over. It's just, I'm calling it. I've actually had 2 humans tell me that was a relief, that they couldn't, got a month of paperwork to do. My anxiety's here.
Yeah.
I can't stop this runaway train. Not that I knew that going into it. I'm not that insightful. I was frustrated. So this was not the greatest tool, but it turned out in that moment it was helpful. So sometimes you're just calling it. I've also found who do you know that's doing something cool that you're interested about in? Let's have you peer-to-peer something. Or I've known some folks who just feel better about getting feedback from peers. I'm let's have them. Let's see if they'd be open to reading your notes and see if their feedback is different. Sometimes you do that amongst coworkers as well. I'm supporting this human. I'm so frustrated. It doesn't seem like they can hear me, or I'm not saying it in a way they can hear. You try. That has worked well.
Yeah.
Doesn't always work, right? But I think having options, choice, as a leader and as the person being led, that's a weird way to say that.
No, those are all such good options. Yeah.
And I think when it comes to quotas in particular, and this is a method I use with my kids a lot that's been helpful, is it's give them an opportunity to put into their own words whether or not they believe that this expectation is attainable and appropriate. It's why is your quota 24 build hours 24 build hours a week? It's what is that about? It's do they understand? Yeah. If they don't, they could be helpful to understand. It's you're salaried at 40 hours a week. Seeing 24 billed hours, leaves you 16 hours in the week. Should that be enough to stay on top of your clinical case documentation? Is there enough, lay out a snapshot of the 40-hour work week. Does everything fit in? And if they can see a way where everything does fit in, it kind of changes their attitude around living up to and meeting that standard, because then it's not just an arbitrary expectation imposed upon, the higher ups, or powers that be, but it's something that they've come to terms with being within reason and just the reality of the job that they're working, and if I also think, we go into being a therapist never with a very clear expectation of the realities of the actual workforce. And some people have the stamina to see 38 clients a week, and never complain about it and always stay on top of it. Some people have stamina that kind of peters out around 15 clients a week, and so if that's the case, it's all right, so now we're talking about multiple streams of income. If you can do 15 clients a week, it's what else can you be doing within the field or maybe outside of the field to supplement those hours to make sure that you are bringing in livable income, if that's something, that you need, and help them figure out what that's going to look like. And sometimes it is coaching out, into a different agency, a different profession. Sometimes you're at a company where there's so much going on, here, if someone could only do part-time therapy, they could find something else, administrative or leadership wise or whatever it may be to supplement it. But yeah, it's you got to figure out where your stamina is at. And it's not always organic, stamina, like any other brand of stamina, is something that can be conditioned and exercised, but you need to know how to condition and exercise it. I went through a stint of seeing, probably for about 4 years, I would see 13 clients in one day.
And I bet you were so efficient with your clinical documentation.
Oh, I would leave every single night. I would go home with everything buttoned up.
See, and I think that's That's important.
I had so much anxiety with everything you just said.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's hear it.
Oh, that's it. I mean, 13 in a day, that's
Oh,
bananas.
but like it is.
Yeah.
But also, that was the only day I saw clients.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like Thursdays were my day that I would see clients. I'd
Oh,
start.
that's different.
Yeah, I'd start at
Okay.
7 a.m. I'd see my last client scheduled was 8 p.m. I'd take 1 hour lunch break, and it's like I never had no shows. It was almost like everybody would show up almost every single week, which honestly was almost better. Like I found that it was easier for me to just like get into that groove and almost get like disoriented, and like go into this weird zone where I'm just in a flow. But then if I'd have a no show, like I'd get totally thrown out of whack. But it's like at my lunch break, I'd stay to myself. I wouldn't go socialize. That would be like kind of my me time. I'd write all my case notes from the clients that morning that I didn't get to, squeezing in between clients. And at the end of the night, I would just wrap up whatever I needed to do to wrap up, because like putting in that extra work at the end of a long day, but knowing that, you're just leaving and shutting your door. It's like I would think about my clients those other 6 days of the week, but not in like I think about them in a like clinical way, like clinically, I'd be like, what could I do here? What direction might I be able to move this in? And like for me, that's
out of there.
yeah.
That's
And
where-
so like then that other stuff is like being able to think creatively about what you're doing clinically. That gives me energy. But that also did hit a point where it became no longer sustainable. Things in my life changed, my job, my like because I would do that as a supplement to teaching full time. And the nature of teaching shifted. It's like it became clear that also needed to shift as well. I'm not in my 20s anymore. And so you just pay attention to yourself, and you adjust as you continue to evolve and the circumstances of your life changes. But, it's like you need people to help you. Like someone had to point out to me that wasn't sustainable anymore. At one point it was. Like it truly was. But yeah, it reached a point where it wasn't. And that's just something you have to listen to and shift.
I have heard that from a few different clinicians around needing, seeing 7 clients a day and needing them in a row. Because they get into a groove, because they get into that mindset or into that like, start, middle, paperwork. And then the no-show, the late cancel throws them off, or the odd half day or something like that. And then I can't do more than 3 in a row before I just, first of all, my body's like, absolutely not. But that's where I'm at with that stamina piece.
Do you need to like get up and move?
Yes. Like when someone's like, absolutely, we should walk for our session today, I'm usually like, yes.
Yeah.
I love sitting. I could sit all day. Forever.
I can't even. Yeah, I'm super jealous of Miranda's swivel chair. I'm struggling that mine is a stable one, and I think that's unfair. And you treated me poorly here today, folks.
Are you not jealous of my swivel chair?
Never coming back, jerks. One of the conversations that I've always found interesting with someone, either new to the field or new to this version of it, is concurrent documentation. And like, first of all, they're like, well, what does that mean? And then second of all, how does that look? And then the third one is always like, but clients are going to get like offended that I bring my computer out. But no, they're not.
But you're a big fan.
They could, if you do it well. I've been offended by a therapist having a client out during a session.
Having a computer out?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said, yeah. I think it's still going to be like a individual conversation. That's the hope. But when we start, I think we're like all or nothing, right? And one of my favorite, you're asking like, what are some tips and tricks? Sometimes I'm just like, here's what you're going to do, right? And I challenge them to at least once a day, do a note with the client, especially a kid. If you say to a kid, my experience is anecdotal, we're going to write what we did today. You tell me what it is. And then you type that sucker out. First of all, that kid's going to come around you and look at your computer. So be prepared for that. But that engagement is delightful. And I think it sort of takes, even if you write gibberish or get like 3 nouns on the progress note, you're already halfway there for whatever the next piece looks like. And I think there's some fear around that for a lot of new humans. Like, no, pull that sucker out, pull your computer out, get them used to it. I used to say, I'm not playing Angry Birds, and I would turn my computer on and show them. And then now it's like,
important.
What's Angry Birds, Kathryn? I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's like, and when you say concurrent case notes, have them be collaboratively concurrent case notes. It's like, make it clear why the laptop's coming out, what you're doing on it. And like, if you're writing a case note about the session, it could be super helpful to have them reflect on the session with you, what was helpful.
What do you want what do you want to think about over the next week?
What's the plan? It's like the plan is always part of the case note. It's like, why not have them be a part of it?
Well, and what were you saying about like asking someone to offer up? What do you think the barriers to these things? I think that with clients, we can also say like, what did you hear from today? It's that clarifying question piece. But I found it also challenging within telehealth, right? Because your eyes are darting all over the place. And when you're on the computer with someone, you're like, stop checking your email while we're talking. I out myself immediately. I'm like, I have your note next to you or next to your face. Or like with EMDR, I've got the ball bouncing over here and I've got your face over here. So you're going to see my eyes going back and forth. So I do, like I said, out loud processing is a tool.
I think that's so important.
That we should use.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we just were talking about like efficiency in clinical documentation. So I don't want to dive too much into that. But I think it is a good suggestion for people who are struggling with keeping their documents up to date and things like that.
Well, yeah. So maybe part of that compassion accountability is like, I give you freedom to choose within this space of what works for you.
Yeah.
This is our end goal, but how you get there, for the most part, is fluid, can change, can be different week to week, can be a little bit goofy. Like I said, I dig it when kids write their own progress notes. Cracks me up.
Same.
I quote them. I'm in. Yeah. Let's do this.
Yeah, kids are my favorite to concurrent with because I do find that it really helps them think about what did we talk about today. And I mean, if they forget, I'll say like, well, what about when we were, doing the puzzle? What was our conversation? And I kind of will usually be like, oh man, what was that conversation that we had? And then let them kind of say, this. And so what do we think we're going to do from here? And I just find that so natural to do with kids.
And I think that gets to be the same conversation you're having with our peers and the folks we support, because it doesn't have to be like this shift it doesn't have to be a code shift.
Right.
It gets to be the same kind of conversation, the same structure. Consequences may look different. Yep.
And so, give people options, so whether it's concurrent, case note documentation, whatever it may be. It's like, don't assume that they're aware of all the potential remedies to whatever it is that they're struggling with. But in every case, it's when someone's struggling to be successful, the last thing they need is somebody to remind them that they're struggling to be successful. It's like they're probably already beating themselves up constantly throughout the day out of that awareness. So it's like, offer solutions, offer to work with them to figure out what the barriers to them being successful are, and whether it's collaborating with other people that have different styles, you think might be a better fit to get them to where they're going, whatever it may be. But it's like, be working toward a solution and make it clear that you're collaboratively working with them toward that solution because you care, because, they want to be successful. You want them to be successful. And when it comes to client stuff, we touch on the balances. The other one is late cancels, no shows, when clients are struggling to be consistent. And I would say that's another one where you can do a lot of preventative work where you don't find yourself buried in a hole where the conversation becomes just more and more uncomfortable to approach because it's just built as a tension in the therapeutic space.
That is why it is so important to talk about the late cancel policy right away, because I feel so bad billing for late cancels or billing for. I mean, I just feel so bad.
I've never done it.
But you know what?
I consistently do it.
Recently, I've had to. I don't know what it is with just like it's getting colder, the weather. I don't know, but I've had more late cancels recently, or even I had a no-show, a couple weeks ago, and I asked one of my colleagues, hey, what's the language that you use when you are reaching out to a client saying, hey, because of the late cancel, here's what because of the late cancel, here's the fee or something like that. And so that was helpful to reach out to a colleague about that. And they gave me some advice over it. And then I just wrote it in an email and And it was a mom that I was talking to. The kid who had late canceled, and the mom was like, "Oh yeah, no, that's understandable." I mean, I think people are so much more understanding than we give them credit for.
Well, and I've had folks who I've supported for years that have had like a late cancel, and I was like, okay, yep, and you know, this, like, the late cancel fee has been charged to your account, you'll see it in the thing. And then I've gotten like pretty spicy responses from folks who this isn't new. So I do think that response isn't the thing that maybe we need to focus on as much as the consistency for ourselves.
Yeah.
With late cancels and no shows, I have a third step before I just close. And that's, okay, you can call me on Mondays and see what I have available, but I won't hold a spot.
Mm-hmm.
It worked really well for like 3 or 4 humans on my caseload. And some folks I never heard from again. And I think, again, it's that choice piece. It's sort of like honoring someone else's autonomy in that space. Like, you've got the tools or the information you need, and I'm not going to take over that decision for you. So off you go. And I think that can also be something we use with the supervisees in the field too. Is I'm going to stop right here because I honor the fact that you've got this and you'll find your way to it, or you won't. And then again, it's that maybe we're not, this isn't the right fit, or this isn't the right fit, or whatever those other pieces are.
Yeah. That's only happened once to me, but similarly, it was a teenager who was living in a group home, and his group home staff really struggled to get him here. And so, after so many freebies of like no shows or late cancels, then I started having the conversation about charging, those sorts of things. And then it got to a point where I was like, all right, Mondays, shoot me an email, I'll let you know what I have open for the week. And then and that worked much better with that client. And so that is it. I'm glad you highlighted that. I think that's a good tip for some people too, if they are not sure, like at what point do they offer some grace, at what point do they need to be more.
But for some clinicians, when you talk about stamina, some clinicians, that's not within their wheelhouse of that flexibility for their week to week. I think you have to know that about yourself.
Sure.
Or you give it a try, and then if you're still just as like kind of wrapped into the attendance policy, then that can't be one of your choices. Again, you guys are parents, I am not, but you can't give options that you're not willing to go with if that's what they choose.
Oh, you're totally right.
You are screwed if that's the channel you're going to go down. I think it's a big tool within community when we have folks driving to houses. I used to have a human who I had to go 45 minutes, and if he wasn't there, I don't mince words.
That's
and
devastating.
So he thrived on this tool. I think for him it was also like, Jargo, I am not in a place to meet today. I'm like, cool, see you next week. But I wasn't holding a spot. There was no tension around it. It was a mutual understanding, and he called. He would call and let me know. And then one day he's like, this isn't working for me anymore. I'm going to do this. I'm like, cool. Yeah. Peace. Let's do a discharge meeting or whatever the case was. But
yeah, and like every conversation you have with a client is a therapeutic conversation and a therapeutic opportunity. So if they're no showing, if they're late canceling, it's like assume that you're not the only person in their life that they're doing that to.
But you might
also
be the
assume,
only person you're having that conversation.
Yeah, also assume that you probably will be the only person in their life willing to have that conversation with them. Yeah. Because that's not something that works towards someone's advantage when that's how you go about, carrying yourself when it comes to commitments, to meetings with other people. Make it clear to them what it means when there's a no-show or a late cancel. That means that's an hour of that I don't get paid for, and that's also an hour that somebody else could have possibly benefited from, that there was no time to, give them that opportunity to benefit from it. But again, with that too, it's like everything is much easier when you stay ahead of all these anticipated realities of working with people clinically, and so it's like find your own style. For me, I'm very clear at every intake that I only see people for weekly recurring appointment times. So like if you want to work with me, I have Thursdays at 1:00 open. I will need to meet with you weekly, because if we're not meeting weekly, I can't be effective, and if I can't be effective, then it's not a good use of either of our time. And, make it clear too that I have a wait list, and so it's like, if you're not able to sustain and commit to those weekly appointments, then, it's like, I'm going to have to work with somebody that can. And I'm happy to help you find another provider that might operate in a way that, is more flexible or spontaneous. Yeah. And they're there, and it's like, and therapists who do operate.
Most of my caseload. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, having a network's important for that reason.
That feels like an important point for new humans, is like, you aren't the only person, Miranda, who can support that caseload.
Yes. Say that again. Say that again.
You are not the only therapist in the world. And I don't mean to like cut people's legs off, but I think we get into a place of like, but I have to.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Turns out they're hot stuff. You're a barrier now in this moment.
Yeah.
And I have one human I support who, because of financial constraints and just quite frankly readiness to change or to even like admit there's something could change, we are on a monthly ad hoc basis.
Yeah.
And that works. And I can think of the other clinicians in my clinic right now, and that wouldn't work. There's just those different pieces of like, oh, thank God I'm not the only person for all of you humans.
Thank God. Could you imagine?
Absolutely not.
It's like, and that's why that's
I already am overcome with having two people in the room with me right now. I don't want to like, oh, okay. You're welcome.
It's that's a huge culprit to burnout that I see, is when therapists totally overinflate the level of self-importance that they play in the lives of their clients. And
I am
it's
a
like,
helper, Lucas. I have one job on this earth, and
yeah, and you're not the only helper.
I think that's also the part when you're like, when you were talking about when I go home, I still think about my clients, but it's not like, I think when someone gets in that tough spot, their brain is also always thinking about, how can I accommodate those pieces? How can I make it work? And round peg, square hole, or something like that. There's some.
Yeah, like I think about my clients frequently outside of session, but I'm not worrying about them.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not distressed about them. It's like, I'm thinking of ways that I can creatively best support them and help them get to where they're going.
Within your own skills and talents.
Within your skills and talents. Yeah. And if the barrier is your skill set, it's like, yeah, that's fine.
Or your boundaries around time, or your availability because you have tiny humans that need your attention at 3:30. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, don't take yourself too seriously. At the same time, take yourself very seriously as a professional that deserves to get paid and reimbursed for your services.
That's good. I like that.
And so, I mean, these are things too, and I think something that's evident in what the three of us share today is everyone needs to find their own groove with this. Everyone's going to need to figure out what makes the most sense for you and how you operate and how you're wired. And yeah, it's all of our responsibility to organize our practice in a way that aligns with the things that give us renewable energy and that's sustainable. And there are so many different options of how we go about discovering that and finding that. And so, accept support, ask people for guidance. When you see somebody who seems like, if you meet one of those people who does, pound out 30 clients a week, build, and they're on top of their paperwork and casework, it's like, don't set that as your standard, but ask them how they do it. What is their method for efficiency? With a lot of them, you might find they haven't written a case note in months.
No, please.
So it's an illusion. And so like, that's problematic, but it's figure out what your groove is. And also, when you do find your groove, know that that's not going to be your groove forever.
I was just thinking that it can and most likely will change.
Yeah. It absolutely will change. How couldn't it? If that's not changing, you're not changing. And if you're not changing, you're what Whitaker would refer to as a dead therapist.
Yeah, you're not paying attention. Or dead. Mine's a little brighter.
Kinder.
Kind.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Kathryn. This was so helpful just to kind of dive into this topic and what compassionate accountability actually looks like from a therapist's perspective, a client perspective, and from a supervisor's perspective. I think that this has been so valuable, and you have shared so many really tangible, concrete tips that people can actually use. I love that. So I appreciate your time.
Like, you can pound out the bass line with the lower end of the keyboard.
Yeah.
I have one more thought that I want to put out there.
Yeah, please.
If there's someone in your life that is falling short in their expectations, and someone that needs to be held accountable, when we don't hold people accountable, what we implicitly communicate to them is we don't believe in them to be any better than what they're showing us right now. And that's devastating, and that's demoralizing, and it's like when it's when someone holds me accountable, especially in a compassionate way, it's inspiring. It motivates me. It's like those are the things that build people up to want to be better, because somebody that cares about you just communicated to you clearly that they know that you can be, and that they're willing to help you get there. So it's uncomfortable, don't wait for it to not be uncomfortable. There's always going to be an aspect to that. And so the remedy here is to just remain mindful of the meaning in doing it, and also the meaning in not doing it. So
words of advice. Thank you. That was good. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with our next one.
Adios. Thanks, Jargo.
Danke.